Okay, my name is Michael Kelly, and I did euthanasia. First off, what came to my mind when I thought of euthanasia was, honestly, when I came to Mount Union and came to this class, I didn't even know what it meant. It's just kind of embarrassing, but I don't know how many people are in the same situation. So the recognition, I feel euthanasia doesn't get the recognition that it maybe deserves. You hear a lot about abortion and the death penalty. It seems to be frequently talked about when euthanasia is just as serious of a thing. And in case you didn't know, it's probably kind of repetitive, but it deals with relieving the ill or suffering by putting them to rest. And basically, it's a moral question if we let patients continue to suffer. So abortion, the death penalty, and euthanasia all raise major questions about morality, whether or not to end life. There are two main types of euthanasia, which you're probably familiar with. Active, which deals with deliberately doing something to end the patient's life. Generally, it's through lethal injection. So if there's no hope, we know that the patient's probably not going to survive. Sometimes that's the best option. And then passive euthanasia is when the medical professional either doesn't do something or stops doing something for the patient, such as stopping life support or no longer using the feeding tube. So this could take up to a few days and could result in a lot of suffering. Although it does result in suffering, generally people do support passive euthanasia. They feel it's more of a natural death and it's more necessary just to let someone die. But I actually support the opposite. I think if there's a choice between the two, I would side with active euthanasia because it just relieves so much more pain, I feel like. But I don't feel it's associated with murder or killing, as people who support passive euthanasia would suggest. I have an example. For an example, if someone has throat cancer, just got diagnosed with throat cancer, death is likely going to result from the throat cancer. And sometimes it doesn't take very long to die from throat cancer. So we're talking like a week, maybe 2 weeks, and when all hope is lost, if you continue to let someone with throat cancer suffer, they're not going to be able to talk eventually. They can't eat, drink, breathe. It's going to be a pretty painful death. It's going to be painful to watch for everyone else too. So I think active euthanasia would be the best option in that situation. Although dying through natural causes may be preferred, death is likely going to be the result anyway in most of euthanasia cases because they're all pretty serious. So after I discussed the main types, it's broken down into three main categories: voluntary, non-voluntary, and involuntary euthanasia. Voluntary is ending a life in a painless manner. Actually, it's interesting that it's legal in Oregon and Washington in the United States, the states. And it's in countries such as the Netherlands, Switzerland, Belgium, Luxembourg. It's also legal. So that's that. And non-voluntary euthanasia is a lot of times also known as mercy killing. It deals with when a patient's in a vegetative state and cannot decide for themselves whether or not they want to continue to live or not, for obvious reasons. So non-voluntary euthanasia is actually illegal everywhere. There's nowhere where that's practiced. And involuntary euthanasia is also illegal. It's pretty much considered murder. It's when the medical professional ends someone's life when that patient doesn't provide feedback, or either provides feedback and doesn't want to die, or doesn't, the topic's not discussed at all, and it's decided that they should let the person rest. So now raises the question of suicide. In the end, suicide and euthanasia have the same result, and ultimately that's death by choice. But however, I feel suicide and euthanasia are completely different. From the standpoint of suicide, I feel deals with mental troubles, and euthanasia deals with physical troubles. Mental problems, usually your body can't fight off physical problems. I mean, it either can or it can't. If you have mental problems, you can seek help, therapists, do what you need to do, even though it can be pretty hard to overcome. But physical problems, you can either treat it or you can't. Sometimes your body just doesn't allow you to do some things, and that's why I feel euthanasia and suicide are pretty different. And then what about murder? Some go as far as saying euthanasia is murder, but I once again believe it cannot be compared. Murder occurs when an individual is unaware of or not expecting death. It's in euthanasia, not only does the patient know death is coming, but actually wants to die. So I don't think it's even close to murder. It's closer to suicide than it is murder. So some of the main arguments that people against euthanasia would say is, first off, they'd say happiness. The patient would rather be relieved and happy to not live anymore than to continue to suffer. And these people say that's not right. They should be mentally strong enough to fight through the pain. Everybody suffers at some point, and you just need to try and think positive and get yourself out of the situation. But there's definitely different levels of suffering. I mean, illness-wise, you could either have a cold, and that's suffering, or you could have cancer, and that cold is like 2 days suffering. Cancer could be years, and much more serious. Also, they say everyone's here for a reason, and we fulfill a purpose. God put us on this earth, and ultimately He's the only one that can take us away through natural causes. But I feel passive euthanasia is taking us away through natural causes, because we're just letting the patient die. But active definitely would not be natural death. And then the value of life, it's just, life is too powerful just to end in a hospital or whatever through euthanasia. They also feel that the doctors are granted too much power, even though the patient ultimately decides. It's not like a doctor's just going to do it without consulting with without the patient. That would be involuntary. So I really don't feel that argument's too good of one. And there is major moral pressure on the family, and it's a very tough decision to just say, hey, let her go or let him go. That's not just as easy as it sounds. So those are the main arguments against euthanasia. And then there's the main arguments for is self-determination. I think that's a big one. You have the right to make your own decision, and only that person who is suffering knows how bad he or she is suffering. And at some point, there's only so much that the doctor can do. It sometimes becomes a question of not will the patient die, but when. And I believe ultimately we're put on this earth to live happy lives. And sure, not every day is great. We have bad days, and we have days where we're not always so happy. But ultimately, in the long run, we want to have a good life. And if we're not living a happy life anymore, then I don't really know how much of a purpose there is. And God wants us to be happy. He wants us to succeed. And actually, translated in Greek, euthanasia means good death. So it deals with having a good death, having a good life. And just on an interesting side note that I didn't know about, doctors actually can create lives in labs. So if they can create lives, why can't they just end it, even if the patient agrees to it? So I do support euthanasia, and I think it should be legalized. I don't know about you guys, but that's just how I feel about it. That's that. It's my presentation. Any questions, concerns, thoughts?
The argument you're doing at the end, I don't know about. I don't know about scientists being able to create life.
They can go into a lab and literally create life.
They can take stuff that's
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
All right, I want to know more about that.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't really know
But suppose they can. Why would that? How does that help us with euthanasia?
Well, if we can create a life, why can't we can create a life? We created it, but not by natural. Well,
Okay.
We did, but we didn't. But why can't we end one the same way?
Well, clearly we can.
We can, but it's not legal.
I mean, should we? Yeah. Some people I think would say we shouldn't be doing either thing.
It's
Right.
like giving doctors the status of God.
Yeah. In a way.
So why would you do that?
I didn't know a whole lot about it until I came into this, but when I researched, they just said that you can create a life in a lab. So if you can create a life, why can't you end one? Why can't the doctor end one? Especially if that person who was born in a lab, created in a lab, had no decision to be born. They, just like any of us. But if a person is in a hospital suffering and they want to actually die, then why can't we do that? They actually have a choice. We didn't have a choice to be born. It just happened. I feel like if you actually have the choice, then I think you should have the power of self-determination. Only you know only you know what you're going through. That's kind of how I stand on it.
Maybe by creating a life they mean, isn't there a process if like a woman like can't get pregnant that they can take like...
Yeah, but I don't think that's what he's talking
Yeah, I know.
about.
I was just
Yeah.
thinking maybe that's what they meant.
Yeah, the government actually does grant them the power to do it. Why, I really don't know, but they do. It's just interesting. It's just an I just think it's interesting. That's just one of the arguments that people use as to why it should be legal.
The question you raised about suicide was interesting. I mean, people I think could argue about words. I mean, in a certain sense, it does seem to be clearly suicide. If by suicide you just mean bringing about your own death. But I think what you were saying is maybe that kind of suicide's not. There's nothing wrong with it. Suicide has a kind of stigma due to the fact that
I
sometimes people commit suicide for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a bad reason.
I don't think euthanasia is necessarily a bad reason to. I mean, it does have the same result. You're deciding to die, but you can. I feel like just people who just commit suicide, they can improve. But if you're in a situation in the hospital where all hope is lost and you're going to continue to suffer, you really can't improve. You know, you're not going to be living too much longer. Why not the whole point of it is to relieve as much pain as possible. And I feel like that should be done. I don't think I don't think God wants to see us suffer. I mean, our family members certainly don't, close friends, so if there's no hope, then why not, move on,
Okay.
I guess.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.